The emergency alarm screamed through the small ship as Jake fought with the controls trying to keep his vessel steady. But it was no use. The engine had taken too much damage from the asteroid field, and now gravity was pulling him down toward the green planet below. He had maybe 2 minutes before impact, maybe less. Jake strapped himself into the seat as tight as he could and aimed for what looked like a valley between two mountains. If he was lucky, the trees would slow his fall. If he was unlucky, well, he tried not to think about that. The ship hit the atmosphere and everything started shaking. The heat shields held, but barely, and Jake watched through the cracked window as the ground rushed up to meet him faster than he wanted. Trees, mountains, a river that sparkled in the sunlight. Then impact metal screamed and twisted around him. The restraints dug into his chest and shoulders so hard he could not breathe. Glass shattered somewhere behind him. And then everything went dark. For a moment when his head hit something hard. When Jake opened his eyes again, everything hurt. He blinked a few times, waiting for his vision to clear. Smoke filled the cockpit, and he could smell burning plastic and melted wires. Not good signs. The control panel was completely dead, no lights, no sounds, nothing. Jake tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his left leg so sharp it made him gasp. He looked down and saw his leg bent at an angle that was definitely wrong, broken. For sure, maybe in 2 places. His ribs hurt too, probably cracked from the restraints, and his head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. But he was alive. And that was more than he expected. Okay. Jake muttered to himself. First things first. Get out of this ship before it explodes or catches fire or whatever else can go wrong. He reached down and unbuckled the restraints with shaking hands, then carefully tried to stand on his good leg. The broken one dragged uselessly, and every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he could not stay here. Jake looked around the cockpit for anything useful. His emergency kit was still strapped to the wall. Thank God inside he found medical supplies, water purification tablets, a knife, some rope, and a flare gun. Not much, but better than nothing. He also grabbed a metal rod from the broken console. It would work as a crutch or a splint. Getting out of the ship took almost 20 minutes of painful crawling and dragging himself through the twisted doorway. By the time he collapsed on the grass outside, he was covered in sweat and breathing hard. But he was out. Jake lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky. It was beautiful here, bluer than Earth, with 2 small moons visible even in daylight, and the air smelled clean like pine trees and fresh water. But he could not rest yet. He needed to splint his leg and find water and figure out where exactly he had crashed. Jake pulled himself to a sitting position and used the knife to cut strips from his jacket. Then he positioned the metal rod against his broken leg and started wrapping it tight. It hurt so bad he had to stop twice to keep from passing out. But he got it done. The splint was not perfect, but it would keep the bone from moving wrong. Next, he needed water. The river he had seen from the air could not be too far away if he followed the sound of running water. Jake used another piece of metal as a crutch and started moving. It was slow, painful work dragging his splinted leg behind him and using the crutch to take weight off it. But he moved forward 1 step at a time. The forest around him was strange, beautiful but strange. The trees were taller than any he had seen on Earth, with silver bark and leaves that shimmered like they had frost on them. Even though it was warm, flowers grew in impossible colors, blues and purples that seemed to glow slightly in the shadows, and it was quiet too. Quiet. No birds. No insects. Nothing. That made Jake nervous. He had been walking for maybe an hour when he heard it. The sound of water rushing over rocks. The river was close. Jake pushed himself faster, ignoring the pain, and finally broke through the trees to find the most beautiful river he had ever seen. The water was crystal clear, running fast over smooth stones, and it was cold, so cold it made his teeth ache when he cupped his hands and drank. But it tasted better than anything he had ever had. Jake filled his water bottles and used the purification tablets, just to be safe. Then he sat on the riverbank and tried to think. He was stranded on an unknown planet with a broken leg and no way to call for help. His ship was destroyed beyond repair, and he had no idea if this planet even had intelligent life. But he was alive, and he had water and his emergency kit. That was a start. Jake decided to follow the river downstream. Rivers meant civilization eventually, or at least better chances of finding food and shelter. He could not stay here in the open, not With night coming, he started walking again using his makeshift crutch and following the river. The pain in his leg had settled into a constant throb that he tried to ignore, and his ribs hurt every time he breathed. But he kept moving. As the sun started to set, Jake noticed something in the distance, smoke rising from beyond a hill. His heart jumped. Maybe there were people here. Maybe someone who could help. He changed direction, heading toward the smoke, moving as fast as he could with his injured leg. It took another hour of painful walking, but finally he reached the top of the hill and looked down into the valley below. What he saw made him stop and stare. There was a village down there, but not like any village he had ever seen. The buildings were made of white stone and wood carved with beautiful patterns that seemed to glow in the fading light. Gardens surrounded every house, filled with those strange glowing flowers, and in the center of the village was a fountain that sprayed water high into the air, catching the last rays of sunlight. But that was not what made Jake stare. It was the dragons. 2 of them circled above the village, one red as fire and one blue as ice. They were massive, with wings that stretched wider than his crashed ship, and they moved through the air with a grace that seemed impossible for something so big. And standing in one of the gardens watching the dragons was a woman. Even from this distance, Jake could see she was not human. She was too tall, too graceful, with long silver hair that fell past her waist and pointed ears that marked her as something else. An elf, Jake thought with wonder. Actual elves and dragons, this planet just got a lot more interesting. He started down the hill toward the village, hoping they were friendly, hoping they would help him, and trying very hard not to think about what would happen if they were not. The elf woman turned as he approached, and Jake saw her eyes widen in surprise. Then she was moving toward him faster than seemed possible, calling out in a language he did not understand. Jake raised his hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace and took another step forward. Then his broken leg gave out and everything went dark again. Kayla reached the fallen human, just as his eyes rolled back and he collapsed onto the grass. She caught him before his head hit the ground, surprised by how heavy he was for someone who looked so thin and worn. He was hurt badly. She could see that right away. His left leg was twisted. Wrong. Even with the crude splint he had made, and his breathing was shallow and painful. Probably broken ribs. His face was pale under the dirt and sweat, and there was dried blood in his hair from a head wound. But what surprised Kayla most was that he had made it this far at all. She had seen the smoke from his crash 2 valleys over that morning, had watched the metal bird fall from the sky trailing fire, and she had assumed whoever was inside was dead. No one could survive a crash like that yet. Here he was, miles from the wreckage, having splinted his own leg and dragged himself through the forest to find help. Human, she thought, with a mixture of amazement and confusion. They really are as stubborn as the stories say. Kayla lifted the human, easily, her elven strength making his weight feel like nothing, and started back toward the village. Her mother, Thera, would know what to do. She was the best healer in the valley, and if anyone could save this strange visitor, it was her mother, Kayla, called as she approached her family home. A human has fallen, he needs help quickly. Thera appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back, and her green eyes sharp with concern. She took one look at the unconscious human, and immediately started directing Kayla, bring him inside to the healing room gently. Now his leg is badly broken and I can smell blood. Kayla carried the human into the small room at the back of the house where her mother did most of her healing work, and laid him carefully. On the padded table, Thera was already gathering supplies, dried herbs, glass bottles filled with glowing liquids, clean cloth for bandages. We need to remove his clothing. Thera said to see the full extent of his injuries. Help me. Together they carefully cut away the human's torn jacket and shirt, revealing a chest covered in dark bruises from the crash restraints. Thera ran her hands over his ribs, gently pressing and feeling 3 broken. She announced, and possibly internal bleeding. We must work. Quickly. Kayla watched as her mother began the healing process. First cleaning the head wound and applying a paste made from silver leaf that would stop any swelling, then carefully examining the broken leg. This is bad, Thera muttered. The bone is broken, in 2 places and not aligned properly. I will have to reset it before I can heal it. Will he survive? Kayla asked, surprised by how much she wanted the answer to be yes. Thera looked at her daughter with knowing eyes. Most beings would not have survived. This long with these injuries, but humans are different. They are fragile in some ways, but incredibly resilient in others. Yes, I believe he will survive. Kyla reached the fallen human just as his eyes rolled back and he collapsed onto the grass. She caught him. Before his head hit the ground, surprised by how heavy he was for someone who looked so thin and worn. He was hurt badly, she could see that. Right away, his left leg was twisted wrong, even with the crude splint he had made, and his breathing was shallow and painful. Probably broken ribs. His face was pale under the dirt and sweat, and there was dried blood in his hair from a head wound, but what surprised Kayla most was that he had made it this far at all. She had seen the smoke from his crash 2 valleys over that morning, had watched the metal bird fall from the sky trailing fire, and she had assumed whoever was inside was dead. No, one could survive a crash like that. Yet here he was miles from the wreckage, having splinted his own leg and dragged himself through the forest to find help humans. She thought with a mixture of amazement and confusion they really are as stubborn. As the stories say, Kayla lifted the human easily. Her elven strength making his weight feel like nothing, and started back toward the village. Her mother Thera would know what to do. She was the best healer in the valley. And if anyone could save this... Strange visitor it was, her mother Kayla called as she approached her family home. A human has fallen, he needs help quickly. Thera appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back and her green eyes sharp with concern. She took one look at the unconscious human, and immediately started directing Kayla, bring him inside to the healing room. Gently, now his leg is badly broken and I can smell blood. Kayla carried the human into the small room at the back of the house where her mother did most of her healing work and laid him carefully on the padded table. Thera was already gathering supplies, dried herbs, glass bottles filled with glowing liquids, clean cloth for bandages. We need to remove his clothing, Thera said, to see the full extent of his injuries. Help me together. They carefully cut away the human's torn jacket and shirt, revealing a chest covered in dark bruises from the crash restraints. Thera ran her hands over his ribs, gently pressing and feeling 3 broken, she announced, and possibly internal bleeding. We must work quickly. Kayla watched as her mother began the healing process, first cleaning the head wound and applying a paste made from silver leaf that would stop any swelling, then carefully examining the broken leg. This is bad, Thera muttered. The bone is broken in 2 places and not aligned properly. I will have to reset it before I can heal it. Will he survive? Kayla asked, surprised by how much she wanted the answer to be yes. Thera looked at her daughter with knowing eyes. Most beings would not have survived this long with these injuries, but humans are different. They are fragile in some ways, but incredibly resilient in others. Yes, I believe he will survive. Her mother mixed several herbs together, creating a thick paste that glowed with soft green light. Then she spread it over the human's broken ribs. The glow intensified for a moment, and Kayla heard the soft sound of bone knitting back together. The leg would be harder. Thera gave the unconscious human a sleeping draft to keep him under. Then she looked at Kayla. I need you to hold his shoulders. He may wake during this, and we cannot have him moving. Kayla positioned herself at the head of the table and held the human's shoulders firmly. Thera gripped the broken leg and with one swift motion pulled and twisted, setting the bone back into alignment. The human gasped, and his eyes flew open wide with pain. He tried to sit up, but Kayla's hands kept him pressed to the table. Easy, Kayla said softly, even though she knew he could not understand her language. You are safe, we are helping you. The human's eyes found hers. They were brown like rich earth and even clouded with pain. They held a sharpness, an intelligence that surprised her most. Beings would be screaming or thrashing, but he seemed to understand that they were trying to help. He took a shaky breath and forced himself to relax back onto the table, his jaw clenched tight against the pain. Brave Thera observed as she applied the healing paste to his leg. And you were right. Kayla, humans are definitely interesting. The green glow surrounded the broken leg and the human watched it with wide eyes. His pain slowly fading as the magic worked. Kayla found herself watching his face, seeing the wonder replace the fear. He is awake, Kayla told her mother. Perhaps we should try to communicate. Thera nodded and pointed to herself. Thera, she said slowly, then pointed to Kayla. Kayla. The human seemed to understand. He pointed to himself and said, "Jake. Jake." Kayla repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue, harsh and short compared to elven names, but it suited him somehow. Jake tried to sit up, and this time Kayla helped him, supporting his back as he looked around the room. His eyes took in everything: the dried herbs, hanging from the ceiling, the bottles of glowing potions, the carved wooden walls. He pointed to the healing paste on his leg and made a questioning sound. "Magic," Kyla said. Knowing he would not understand the word, but wanting to try anyway, she held up her hand and called a small flame to dance in her palm. Showing him, Jake's eyes went even wider and he smiled. Despite his pain, it was a good smile, Kayla thought, warm and genuine. He pointed to himself, then made a gesture like something falling from the sky and exploding, clearly trying to explain what had happened. "We saw," Kayla said, nodding toward the window where the smoke from his crash was still visible in the distance. "You fell from the stars." Jake nodded enthusiastically, then pointed to his leg and gave her a thumbs-up sign that seemed to mean thank you. Over the next hour, Thera finished healing the worst of his injuries. The broken bones were mended, though they would need a few more days to fully strengthen, and the internal bleeding was stopped. His head wound was cleaned and sealed, and the bruises were fading. But he was exhausted. Kayla could see it in the way his eyes kept trying to close in the slump of his shoulders. "He needs rest," Thera said, "and food when he wakes. Let him sleep here tonight. We will learn more about our visitor tomorrow." Kayla helped Jake lie back down on the healing table and covered him with a soft blanket. His eyes were already closing, but before he fell asleep, he caught her hand and squeezed it gently. "Another thank you." She squeezed back, then watched as sleep finally claimed him. Outside the window, Ember and Frost, her two dragons, landed in the garden, their massive heads turning to look through the glass at the sleeping human. They are curious about him. Thera observed dragons have good instincts about people if they accept him. He must be trustworthy. Kayla thought about the way Jake had dragged himself miles with a broken leg, about the intelligence in his eyes and the warmth of his smile, about how he had smiled at her magic instead of fearing it. "Yes," she said softly. "I think he might be something special." Her mother gave her a knowing look that Kayla chose to ignore. Tomorrow she would find a way to truly communicate with their visitor. Tomorrow she would learn why he had fallen from the stars and whether he could return. But tonight she would let him rest. He had earned it. Jake woke to sunlight streaming through a window and the smell of something delicious cooking. For a moment he forgot where he was and tried to sit up quickly, which was a mistake. His body protested immediately. Everything hurt, but it was a dull ache now. Instead of the sharp pain from before, he looked down at his leg and found it wrapped in clean white bandages instead of his makeshift splint, and when he carefully flexed it, the bone held strong magic, he thought, remembering the green glow from the night before. Actual magic. The door opened, and the elf woman from yesterday entered. Carrying a tray of food, she was even more beautiful in the daylight, tall and graceful, with silver hair that caught the sun, and violet eyes that studied him with open curiosity. "Kayla," she said, pointing to herself. "Jake," he replied, pointing to his own chest, then his stomach making an exaggerated hungry face. Kayla laughed a sound like music and set the tray on the table beside him. There was bread still warm from the oven, a bowl of something that looked like stew cheese fruit he did not recognize, and a cup of water. He ate slowly, at first testing to see if his stomach would cooperate, but the food was amazing, and he found himself eating faster than was probably polite. Kayla watched him with amusement, and when he finished, she took the tray and gestured for him to follow her. Jake stood carefully testing his healed leg. It held his weight with only a slight twinge, and he found he could walk almost normally. Kayla led him outside into the garden where her mother Thera was tending to plants, but that was not what made Jake stop and stare. The dragons were there, the red one and the blue one lounging in the grass like giant cats, and they were even more impressive up close. The red dragon had scales that shimmered like rubies and eyes like molten gold. The blue one had scales like sapphires and eyes like ice chips. Jake felt his heart racing. Part fear, part excitement. He had dreamed of discovering alien life. But dragons were beyond anything he had imagined. Kayla walked right up to the red dragon and scratched under its chin. The massive creature closed its eyes and made a rumbling sound that Jake realized was purring. Then Kayla gestured for him to come closer. Jake approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. The red dragon opened one golden eye and studied him, then sniffed at him with a nose the size of Jake's head. The dragon huffed a breath of warm air that smelled like smoke and cinnamon. Then, to Jake's amazement, it lowered its head and pushed gently against his chest like a dog wanting attention. Jake reached out with shaking hands and touched the dragon's scales. They were warm and smooth like polished stone, and the dragon purred louder, clearly approving. Ember, Kayla said, patting the red dragon. Then she pointed to the blue one. Frost approached more cautiously, circling Jake once before deciding he was acceptable. Then the blue dragon also pushed its head against him, wanting attention. Jake found himself laughing and petting both dragons while Kayla watched with what looked like approval. Thera called something from the garden and Kayla gestured for Jake to follow her back inside. They went to a room filled with books and papers, and Kayla pulled out what looked like a journal. She opened it to a blank page and drew a simple picture of a person, then pointed to herself and said, "Kayla, slowly." Jake understood she was trying to establish a way to communicate. He took the pencil and drew his own stick figure, then pointed to himself. Kayla nodded enthusiastically, then drew a simple house and said, "Home." Jake repeated the word, trying to match her pronunciation. For the next several hours, they worked on building a basic shared vocabulary. Kayla would draw pictures or point to objects and say the Elven word. Then Jake would say the word in his language. They taught each other numbers, colors, simple actions like eat, sleep, walk. Kayla's mother joined them, bringing more food and adding her own words to the lessons. Thera was patient and kind, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about Jake as much as teaching him. By the time the sun was setting, Jake could string together basic sentences in the Elven language and understand much of what Kayla and Thera said to him. It was not perfect, but it was a start. "Where do you come from?" Kayla asked carefully, speaking slowly so he could understand. Jake pointed up at the sky stars far away. "My home is there." "Why did you come here?" Jake made a gesture of something falling. "Crash, did not mean to come here." "Accident. Can you go back?" Kayla asked. And Jake noticed something in her voice. Was she hoping he would say yes or no? Jake shook his head. "My ship broken, cannot fix alone. Need materials. I do not have, so you must stay here for now." "Yes," Jake said, then added, "If that is acceptable, I do not wish to burden you." Kayla's mother. Thera smiled. "Burden you? Fixed our water wheel today and helped replant the garden and made friends with the dragons. You are not a burden." Jake felt his face grow warm. He had seen the water wheel was broken this morning and his hands had moved automatically to fix it. It was what he did. He was an engineer. He fixed things. "I like to be useful," he said. "We can see that," Thera replied. "And I think you will be very useful here. There is much you can teach us about your people and much we can teach you." "What about your people?" Jake asked Kayla. "Will they accept a human staying here?" Kayla considered this. "Most elves keep to themselves," she said, "but those who live in this valley are different. We believe in learning from others and growing. My people will be curious about you, but I do not think they will reject you, especially once they see that Ember and Frost have accepted you. Dragons are good judges of character." Thera added, "If they trust you, we trust you." Jake felt something warm settle in his chest. These people had taken him in, healed him, fed him, and now offered him a place to stay when he had nothing to offer in return except his skills. "Thank you," he said. Meeting Kayla's eyes, "I will work hard. I will help however I can. And when I find a way to contact my people, I will make sure they know how kind you have been." Kayla smiled, and Jake felt his breath catch. She really was beautiful, and not just in appearance. There was a strength to her, a confidence mixed with genuine kindness. "Come," she said, standing. "I want to show you something." She led him outside where the two moons were rising in the sky, casting silver light over the valley. Kayla whistled a high, clear note, and Ember the red dragon trotted over. "Can you climb?" Kayla asked. "I think so," Jake said, though his heart was racing. Kayla pulled herself onto Ember's back and reached down to help Jake up. He grabbed her hand and she pulled him up behind her. The dragon scales were warm under him and he could feel the powerful muscles moving beneath. "Hold on," Kayla said. Before Jake could ask what that meant, Ember launched into the air. Jake wrapped his arms around Kayla's waist and held on as the dragon climbed higher and higher into the night sky. The wind rushed past them, and the valley spread out below, sparkling with lights from the village and the glow of magical plants. It was the most amazing thing Jake had ever experienced. Kayla looked back at him and grinned clearly, enjoying his reaction. "This is my world," she said, gesturing to the valley below. "What do you think?" Jake looked at the beautiful valley, at the two moons shining above, at the dragon carrying them through the sky, and at Kayla, her silver hair streaming in the wind. "I think," he said honestly, "that falling here might be the best accident that ever happened to me." Kayla's smile grew wider, and even in the moonlight, Jake could see a slight blush on her cheeks. "Good," she said, "because I think having you here might be good for us too." They flew for another hour with Frost joining them in the air, and Jake felt something he had not felt since the crash. Hope. Maybe he was stranded. Maybe he could not go home yet. But perhaps being here, learning from these people, flying with dragons, getting to know Kayla, maybe that was not such a bad thing. Maybe sometimes the best adventures were the ones you never planned. 3 weeks passed quickly, and Jake found himself settling into life in the valley more easily than he ever expected. Each morning he woke in the small guest room Thera had given him and helped with chores around the village. He fixed broken tools, repaired roofs, and created simple machines that made daily tasks easier. The elves watched his work with fascination, and soon other villagers were coming to him with problems that needed solving. He built a better irrigation system for the gardens, designed a pulley system that made drawing water from the deep well easier, and even created a simple alarm that would warn if predators came too close to the livestock at night. The elves called him Clever Hands, and Jake found himself enjoying the work more than he had enjoyed anything in years back home. He had been just another engineer in a massive corporation, but here every problem he solved made a real difference in people's lives. But his favorite part of each day was the time he spent with Kayla. She had taken it upon herself to teach him about elven culture and magic, while he taught her about human technology and the worlds beyond their planet. They would sit in the garden for hours talking about everything and nothing while Ember and Frost dozed nearby. Kayla was endlessly curious about space travel, about other planets and alien races, about how humans had developed technology instead of magic. And Jake found himself telling her stories about Earth, about cities that touched the sky, and machines that could think. In turn, Kayla taught him about the dragons, about how each rider bonded with their dragons when they were young, and how that bond lasted for life. She taught him basic magic too, though she warned him that humans could not naturally wield it the way elves could. Jake practiced the simple spells she showed him, calling small flames to his palm, or making objects float for a few seconds. It took enormous concentration and left him exhausted, but the look of delight on Kayla's face whenever he succeeded made it worthwhile. They also flew together often. Kayla would take him on Ember's back, and they would soar over the valley, exploring places Jake could never reach on foot. They found hidden waterfalls and ancient ruins and meadows filled with flowers that sang when the wind blew through them. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from a cliff overlooking the valley, Kayla turned to him with a serious expression. "Jake, there is something I must tell you." She said, "My mother has been planning something." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Kayla laughed. "It depends on how you feel about being set up by an overly enthusiastic elven mother." "Oh no," Jake said, but he was smiling. "Thera has decided you would make a good match for me." Kayla continued, her cheeks turning slightly pink. "She has been dropping hints for days about how well we work together, how the dragons adore you, how useful you are. And what do you think?" Jake asked, his heart beating faster. Kayla was quiet for a moment, looking out at the sunset instead of at him. "I think," she said slowly, "that when you first crashed here, I expected you to be temporary, a problem to solve, and then send on your way, but you have become part of our lives. You help everyone, you make people laugh. You have taught us so much." And she finally looked at him. "I enjoy your company more than I expected to." Jake felt warmth spread through his chest. "I enjoy your company too," he admitted. "In fact, I have been thinking that even when I find a way to contact my people, I might not want to leave." Kayla's eyes widened. Really? Really, Jake said. Your world is beautiful, and I have learned more here in 3 weeks than I did in years back home. And he took a breath. For courage, and there is this amazing woman who rides dragons and does magic and does not seem to mind that I am just a human, who is good at fixing things. Just a human, Kayla repeated. She moved closer to him on the cliff edge. You saved yourself. From a crash that should have killed you, you walked miles on a broken leg. You have made our entire village better with your clever hands and kind heart. You are not just anything, Jake. They sat close enough that their shoulders touched, and Jake could smell the scent of wildflowers that always seemed to cling to Kayla. So what do we do about your mother? Jake asked, trying to lighten the mood. Kayla laughed. We let her think she is winning. She will be insufferable otherwise, but she rested her head against his shoulder. We take our time, we learn about each other properly, no rushing. I can agree to that, Jake said, and carefully he put his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that, watching the sun set and the moon's rise, and Jake thought about how strange life could be. A month ago, he had been alone flying through space with nothing but his work to keep him company. And now he was sitting on a cliff with an elf woman who made his heart race, watching dragons circle in the twilight. How is your leg? Kayla asked later as they flew back to the village. Perfect, Jake said. Thanks to your mother's magic. It is like it was never broken good, Kayla said, because tomorrow I want to take you somewhere special. Somewhere I have never shown anyone else. Where the dragon nesting grounds. Kayla said Ember is going to lay eggs soon and I want you to see it. Jake felt honored that she would share something so personal. Really, you would let me see that? Yes. Kayla said simply. You are important to me, Jake. I want to share my world with you. The next morning they flew out before dawn. Frost came with them carrying supplies because Kayla said they might be gone all day. They flew far beyond the valley to a place where the mountains formed a natural bowl filled with hot springs and volcanic rock. This is where dragons come to nest. Kayla explained the heat from the earth keeps the eggs warm. Ember circled the nesting grounds 3 times before landing on a flat rock near one of the hot springs. The dragon seemed restless, pacing back and forth. It will be soon. Kayla said we should give her space but stay close in case she needs us. They settled on a ridge overlooking the nesting area, and Kayla unpacked the food Thera had sent, bread and cheese and dried fruit they ate while watching Ember prepare her nest, using her claws to scrape out a depression in the warm sand. This is amazing, Jake said. I cannot believe you are sharing this with me. Kayla smiled. You are part of my life now, Jake. That means you are part of all of this, the dragons, the magic, everything. What about the rest of your people? Jake asked. Will they accept a human being so involved in your world? Some will welcome it. Kayla said others will take time to adjust, but my mother is one of the village elders and she clearly approves of you. That will help. And besides, she added with a mischievous grin, the dragons have chosen you. That matters more than anything. As if in response, both Ember and Frost made deep, rumbling sounds of agreement. They spent the day watching Ember and talking about the future. Jake told Kayla about his dreams of exploring the galaxy, of finding new worlds and making contact with other civilizations. Kayla told him about her dreams of strengthening the bonds between her people and the outside world, of learning and growing. We are not so different, you and I, Kayla said. We both want more than what we were born into. As the sun began to set, Ember finally settled into her nest, and with a soft crooning sound she laid 3 eggs each. One the size of Jake's head with scales that shimmered red and gold. Kayla gasped. 3 eggs, that is rare. Most dragons only lay 1 or 2. Is that good? Jake asked. It is wonderful. Kayla said, her eyes shining. It means the dragons are thriving. It means the future is bright. She turned to Jake and took his hand. Just like us, she said softly. Just like our future. Jake squeezed her hand and pulled her close, and as the moons rose over the nesting grounds, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and perfect. When they pulled apart, Kayla was smiling. My mother is going to be insufferable about this, she said. Probably, Jake agreed. But I think I can live with that. They flew home under the stars with Ember purring contentedly behind them, and Jake knew without doubt that he had found where he belonged. 2 months after the crash, Jake sat in Thera's garden working on a device he had been building in secret. It was a communication beacon made from salvaged parts of his ship combined with materials he had found in the valley. If it worked, it would send a signal that his people could track. Kayla found him there, surrounded by wires and metal pieces, her shadow falling across his work. "You have been working on this for weeks," she said, sitting beside him. "Will it work?" Jake set down his tools and wiped his hands. "I think so. The power source is strong enough, and I have managed to boost the signal," but he hesitated. But if it works, my people will come. They will want to take me home to debrief me about this planet, about your people." "And you do not want to go?" Kayla said. It was not a question. Jake looked at her. Really looked at her silver hair catching the sunlight. Violet eyes that had become so familiar, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. "I do not want to leave you," he said honestly. "But I also cannot just disappear. My family will think I am dead, and there are responsibilities, things I left unfinished." Kayla nodded slowly. "I understand, and I would never ask you to abandon your family. But Jake, what will you tell them about us? That is what I wanted to talk to you about." Jake said, "I want to tell them the truth, that I crashed here, that your people saved me, and that I have fallen in love with one of them." Kayla's eyes widened. "You want to tell them about us? More than that?" Jake said, reaching for her hand. "I want to ask if some of my people can come here as ambassadors to establish formal contact between our civilizations. I think our peoples could learn so much from each other. That is a big decision." Kayla said, "It would change everything for my people." "I know," Jake said. "That is why I wanted to ask you first before I activate the beacon, you and your mother and the village elders. You all need to decide if you want this contact." Kayla was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, she spoke. "My people have lived in isolation for thousands of years. We have our magic, our dragons, our traditions, but Jake, I have learned so much from you about technology, about other worlds, and I think staying isolated forever would be a mistake." She squeezed his hand. "But we need to do this carefully. We cannot let your people overwhelm us or try to change who we are." "Agreed," Jake said, "which is why I want to propose something. What if you came with me when my people arrive? What if you came to see my world, just as I have seen yours? Then we could decide together how to build this bridge between our peoples." "You want me to leave the valley?" Kayla asked. Surprised. "Just temporarily," Jake said. "And only if you want to. Kayla, I love you, and whether we are here or on my world or exploring the galaxy together, I want us to be together, but I also want you to see what else is out there to make an informed choice about what you want for your future." Kayla's eyes were bright with tears. She leaned forward and kissed him deeply. "Yes," she said when they pulled apart. "Yes, I want to see your world. I want to meet your family. I want to explore the stars with you." Jake grinned, then he pulled out a small box from his pocket. "I made this for you," he said, opening it to reveal a ring made of silver metal from his ship engraved with tiny dragons. "On my world, when two people want to spend their lives together, one gives the other a ring as a promise," he explained. "It is called an engagement ring." Kayla took the ring with trembling fingers. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Will you?" Jake asked. "Will you be my partner in this adventure, in bridging our worlds and building a future together?" "Yes," Kayla said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger and they kissed again while overhead Ember and Frost performed loops in the sky, clearly celebrating. That evening they gathered the village for a meeting. Jake and Kayla stood before the elders with Thera beside them and explained everything about the beacon, about Jake's proposal for contact, about Kayla's decision to visit his world. The elders debated for hours. Some were excited about the possibilities, while others were worried about losing their way of life. But in the end, they agreed to allow Jake to activate the beacon, with the condition that any contact would be carefully controlled and that Kayla would represent their interests. 3 days later, a ship appeared in the sky. It was smaller than a warship, but larger than Jake's exploration vessel, and it landed in the meadow outside the village. Jake and Kayla walked out to meet it together with Ember and Frost flying overhead. The ship doors opened and 3 humans emerged. A woman with dark skin and captain insignia. A man with gray hair who Jake recognized. As his supervisor and a younger woman carrying medical equipment, Jake the captain said, relief clear in her voice. "We thought you were dead when we found your ship. Debris." "I almost was," Jake admitted, "but these people saved me." He gestured to Kayla, who stepped forward confidently. "I am Kayla," she said, in careful English that Jake had been teaching her. "I speak for my people." "Welcome to our world." The captain looked between Jake and Kayla, taking in their joined hands and the ring on Kayla's finger. Then, she smiled. "I think there is a lot you need to tell us, Jake." Over the next week, the humans and elves began the slow process of getting to know each other. The captain, whose name was Lieutenant Chen, was respectful and curious, asking permission before, exploring and making it clear that they came as guests, not conquerors. Thera charmed everyone with her cooking and her stories. The elves demonstrated their magic while Jake showed his people the devices he had built, the innovations he had helped create, and through it all, Jake and Kayla worked together, translating, explaining, building the bridges that would connect their worlds. On the day before they were scheduled to leave for the human ship to make the journey to Jake's homeworld, Kayla stood at the edge of the valley looking out at the place she had lived her entire life. "Are you afraid?" Jake asked, coming to stand beside her. Terrified, Kayla admitted, but also excited. "I never thought I would leave this valley. And now, I am going to travel through space to see other worlds." "You can change your mind," Jake said. "No one would blame you." Kayla shook her head. "No, I want this. I want to see everything. To learn everything, and besides," she smiled at him. "I want to meet your mother." Jake laughed. "Fair warning. She is a lot like Thera. She will probably start planning our wedding the moment she meets you." "Good," Kayla said, "because Thera has already started planning it. We might as well let them work together." They stood together watching the sunset one last time before the adventure really began, Jake said. "This is not how I thought my life would go. Crashing on an alien planet, falling in love with an elf woman, becoming a dragon rider, starting an interspecies alliance. Is it better or worse than you expected?" Kayla asked. "Better," Jake said. "Definitely better." Kayla leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "My mother says the universe has a way of putting people where they need to be," she said. "Maybe your crash was not an accident. Maybe it was fate." Maybe Jake agreed, or maybe I was just lucky. Either way, I am grateful. The next morning they boarded the ship together. Ember and Frost included, because Kayla had insisted they were family, and where she went, they went. Lieutenant Chen had been surprised, but had made room in the cargo bay for the dragons as the ship lifted off. Jake and Kayla stood at the viewing window, watching the valley grow smaller below them, the village where they had met, the garden where they had fallen in love, the mountains and forests that had become Jake's second home. "This is just the beginning," Kayla said softly. Jake took her hand. The ring he had made catching the light. Yes, he agreed, the beginning of something amazing. Behind them, Ember and Frost rumbled their agreement, and the ship jumped to faster than light speed, carrying them toward new worlds, new adventures, and a future that neither of them could have imagined, but both were ready to embrace. Together, they would bridge two worlds, and in doing so, create something entirely new. A future where magic and technology, elves and humans, dragons and starships could all exist, side by side. And it all started with a crash, with an injury that should have been fatal, and with two people who chose to see possibility instead of impossibility. Sometimes the best love stories, Jake thought, begin with disasters. Kayla squeezed his hand and smiled as if she could read his thoughts. And sometimes, she said, the best adventures begin with a single choice: to trust, to hope, to say yes to the impossible. They stood together at the window, watching the stars streak past, and dreamed of all the impossible things they would make real.